Hi all. Today I wanted to talk about Bad Batch Episode 3 titled Replacements. Just as a note, there will be spoilers, so if you haven't watched this episode yet, this is the official spoiler warning. So I think there was more to unpack in this week's episode than last week's. Not to say I didn't enjoy last week's episode, I just think there was a bit more to take in on this episode. There are two stories being told and interwoven in this episode. One of the stories is about what is currently going on with Crosshair, and then the other is what is going on with the rest of the Bad Batch. For the sake of trying not to be too confusing, I'm going to start with what is going on with Crosshair in this episode, then we will look at what is going on with the rest of the Bad Batch in this episode. The portion of the episode related to what is going on with Crosshair, to me at least, was pretty dark. We are still seeing what is happening to this far, far away galaxy, now that it is under the thumb of the Empire. There is a fair amount of violence as we see people being shot in cold blood. We saw plenty of gruesome acts in the Clone Wars, especially as it went on to the later seasons, but it feels like the fact that they are doing the show on a streaming service instead of a cable channel is giving the showrunners a certain level of freedom to go a bit darker with the story when needed. This is not to say it was excessive or gory, just that we know from the show that unarmed civilians were shot in cold blood, which is a pretty dark concept in general. I am sure this level of dark content is being done to tell the story that needs to be told, but it also seems to me like the showrunners are trying to walk a fine line between an animated show and an animated show that can be enjoyed by many different generations of Star Wars fans, not just kids. If this is what is happening, it is a wise move, because it keeps fans like me interested in the stories being told. I don't mind some of the lightheartedness that goes on in the episodes, because it brings balance when there are dark aspects of the show. Kind of interesting that these shows can achieve a level of balance in the Star Wars universe that other content couldn't, but I digress. So anyway, Crosshair is getting a Winter Soldier-like treatment where it seems like he is constantly being reprogrammed, or at least having his programming reinforced to ensure he remains compliant. This also seems like it is being done by the Kaminoans to make him the best clone choice to be put in charge of a squad of volunteer Empire troopers in order to try and keep the clone program going in some way, shape, or form. We also see that the volunteer troopers in Crosshair's squad have been made somewhat relatable. They have joined to help provide security for themselves. One of the soldiers makes the point that they didn't feel this level of well-being or security under the Republic. This at least gives believable reasons that someone would sign up to be a trooper for the Empire. Crosshair has been put in charge of a squad made up of these volunteer troopers. This newly formed squad is put to the test to complete the mission that the Bad Batch was supposed to complete in the first episode. This new squad is to go after Saw and his rebels to try and quash them before they gain traction. The squad makes it to Onderon and locates the rebels. They determine that Saw isn't there, and then this is where the dark portion of the episode really kicks in. We see that Crosshair is a good soldier following orders. He, or his chip rather, are making him follow the mission to the letter. He is basically to go and eliminate the rebels and their associates. One of the volunteer members of the squad voices their disagreement with how their mission should be handled. What it amounts to is that they do not wish to kill unarmed civilians, and suggest capturing and taking the civilians back to see if they can get additional information out of them. Without hesitation, Crosshair shoots the soldier that suggests merely capturing the civilians. He then forces the other members of the squad to execute everyone, even the women and the children in the civilian group. The squad then does this, as what choice do they really have? It boils down to do it or die. So here is really the whole issue that is being debated between the Empire and the Kaminoans. Is it better to have good soldiers that follow orders, or is it really better to have the troopers who are willingly there? We as an audience ultimately know what happens to the clones, but the contrast between the two sides is displayed well in this episode by showing how the volunteers want to handle the civilians, and how the clone following orders wants to handle the civilians. We did get to meet the person within the Empire that implemented the chain codes in this episode, Rampart. At the end of the episode, he gets a promotion to Admiral for his work thus far in the Empire through both the chain codes and the work of this new squad. It seems like we will be seeing more of Rampart this season, as he is left on Kamino to continue to work on the question of the clones versus volunteer troopers. When we last see Crosshair in this episode, he is in what appears to be the Bad Batch's quarters on Kamino, and seems to be very contemplative. It is not made clear what exactly he is thinking, but I have to assume he is contemplating his Bad Batch brothers. Whether or not he is contemplating them because he misses them, and we do see the rest of the Bad Batch express that they miss Crosshair in this episode, or if he is contemplating them because Crosshair still views them as traitors that will have to be dealt with eventually. Alright, so over to the other portion of the episode dealing with the rest of the Bad Batch. At the end of last week's episode, we see the Bad Batch leaving Seleucami while being shot at by troopers. Some of the shots have managed to damage the ship, and Echo is trying to make repairs. Tech is working on the inhibitor chips basically to figure out how to make sure they don't cause the Bad Batch to turn like Crosshair, and presumably or ultimately even, how to help Crosshair with his chip. However, it turns out that the ship has taken too much damage, and they are forced to make an emergency landing. They wind up making a crash landing. This is the first one for Omega, and she is understandably scared. I am sure it isn't the first one for the Bad Batch, but Wrecker's reaction to the landing was pretty funny. Wrecker hits his head during the landing, and seems like he has a mild concussion, which ultimately prevents him from being able to do much to help with the repairs for the ship. Once the Bad Batch has landed, they determine that they have to replace a capacitor. Echo and Tech go outside of the ship to work on replacing the capacitor when they realize they are not alone, and Ordo Moondragon steals the newly installed capacitor. Echo and Tech stay to work on the ship and keep an eye on Wrecker while Hunter goes to get the capacitor. After some discussion about Omega being part of the team now, she joins Hunter on his quest. While Hunter and Omega track the dragon attacks Hunter, knocking him out of commission. Omega makes sure to put the breathing apparatus back on Hunter, and then goes after the capacitor. She tracks the dragon to its lair and makes an exchange of her flashlight for the capacitor. She gets away with the capacitor and regroups with Hunter. They get back to the ship and get everything installed and in mostly working order. We learned in the episode that Omega doesn't really have a place just for her on their ship. We also find out she has never really had her own room even back on Kamino. While Hunter and Omega were out retrieving the capacitor, Wrecker set up a space within the ship for Omega, so she now has her own room. Wrecker even lets Omega have Lulu. This was really a touching and sweet moment in the episode. I think this type of moment was needed to balance out the darker portion of the episode. This action of giving Omega her own room shows that Omega is being further incorporated into the Bad Batch team. She is still working on finding her way within that group, and they are navigating having a younger member on their team. It is clear they still miss Crosshair, and even feel regret for having to leave things the way they did with him. They are working on a way to bring him back into the fold and deal with the inhibitor chips. There are, of course, lots of unanswered questions after this episode, and two in regards to Omega that really resonated with me. The first question being, what is it exactly that makes Omega a special clone? She seems to pick up really quickly on things by mimicking or observing, like she picked up on tracking after just working with Hunter for a little bit tracking the dragon. She was able to fire a shot accurately while escaping Kamino after observing the team firing the weapons. These are things that the other clones had to go through training in order to be able to do well, but it seems like she isn't needing that training. The second question is, does Omega have an inhibitor chip? My guess is that she does, but that it is probably an upgrade of some sort. We know that the Bad Batch have chips, but for most of them, the chips didn't work like it did for the Regs. If the Kaminoans want to keep a viable cloning program with the Empire, they have to be able to provide something that is honestly unique. So enhanced clones that require little training with upgraded inhibitor chips that won't let the clones turn on the Empire, but still be a good soldier that follows orders, would be a good way to keep the Kaminoans in the game. Alright, like I said in the beginning, there was a lot to unpack in this episode, and I am sure I could probably keep going, but I have gone on long enough for now, so I think I will stop there for this entry. So here are my questions for y'all about this episode. What did you think about the darker tone in this episode? What do you think about Crosshair's actions in this episode? Do you think Omega has an inhibitor chip? Also, I would love to use these videos to showcase fan art. If you have any you would like for me to include in the videos, please send it over and I will do my best to include it. Well, I think that is about it for this entry, so I just wanted to say that I hope you have a great day and may the Force be with you.